Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BSF Canada and Syngenta Canada.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin. Welcome to the Soybean School. Today I'm at Syngenta Canada's Honeywood Research Farm, catching up with Abhi Deora. Abhi, how's it going?
It's pretty good. How about you, Bern?
I'm good. Hey, it's another hot day here in Ontario, and I want to talk about soybean cyst nematode. Now that's, as you know, a pest we've been, chasing a long time and dealing with a long time. But I often wonder, do we give it enough attention?
Not really, just because it is all under the ground. So we really don't pay a lot of attention, and the infection happens under the ground. You don't see it like foliar diseases, right? So yeah, we don't really pay a lot of attention to soybean cyst nematode the way we should be, because this is the number one pest right now in soybeans in Ontario.
Yeah. So talk about that. It's the number one pest. What's the footprint of SCN across Ontario?
So traditionally, as you know, soybean cyst nematode has been established in southwestern Ontario, some of the counties that are close to the U.S. border. So we are talking about Middlesex, Chatham-Kent, Elgin, Lambton counties, and now this pest has been progressing to a little bit more east. Now you would have Oxford, Norfolk, Haldimand, all these counties that are, you have the samples that are positive coming from these counties, and even worse, you have some of the counties that are east of Toronto that are now coming positive, and even in central Ontario. And if you think about, all this is now spreading, and it is becoming a big problem now in Ontario.
Let's talk about, I guess, symptoms. And a big part of this conversation, Abhi, is that below and above ground, sometimes you don't see them.
Yeah, you don't see them sometimes because you don't see them. The reason for that is because the symptoms do not show a lot of the time. And when you don't see the symptoms, then you don't really know. And this is the nature of this pest. It's a silent yield robber is what we say, because you don't see the symptoms. It's all happening below the ground, and sometimes the impact doesn't show up on the plant.
Yeah.
So
what do we see on the plant, though, when we do see, visual signs on the plant?
So generally, we would say late vegetative stages when you would see the impact on the plants, and the symptoms will generally look like, nutritional deficiency, for example, drought stress, herbicide injury, and maybe even sometimes looks like some foliar diseases. So you have to pay a pretty close attention. The only way to diagnose soybean cyst nematode is you have to dig up the roots and then see there's something called cyst. That's where the name came from. So that's the yellow lemon-shaped body of the pest itself. That's what you're looking for, and they're pretty tiny. They're even smaller than the soybean nodules. So you have to see pretty closely that you have that cyst on the root or not, and that is the right way to diagnose this pest.
What about yield impact? If we have an infestation, if we have that population in the field, Abhi, what type of, yield loss could growers, see?
So when it comes to the yield loss, that depends on two things, I would say. One is what level of the pressure or the population that you have in the field, and what is the type of the soil that you have. So those are the two things, and that is what is going to dictate how much of the yield loss you're going to have as a grower. Generally, I would say if you have 500 eggs per 100 cc or per 100 gram of soil is the level that AMAFRA tells that your risk level is you're losing from 20 to 50% of the yield loss. So sandier soils, basically you have the same level of the pressure, you would have more yield loss versus when you're getting into the fine textured soils.
Right. Hey, let's talk about how we manage this pest. And you had four key, aspects of management that growers should really focus on. And it starts with knowing your number.
Yeah, knowing the number is very important, because as a grower, you want to know how much pest pressure you have in the field. And this gives you a baseline on how do you manage the pressure. So knowing your number is more important, and this is the only way actually to confirm that you have soybean cyst nematode.
Abhi, another thing to think about, resistance genes, genetics, and rotating resistance genes.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Bern. So the primary tool of defense for this pest is always resistance. Yeah. So you have to begin with resistance. You need to have a resistance gene. So when you pick up any seed guide, you would see as a grower that you have PI88, 788 is one of the genes that has been used predominantly in the varieties. And now there is another gene that's called peaking that's also becoming more and more available. PI88, 788, the first gene that is more than 95% of the varieties, is now losing its resistance power, and so you have the breakdown of the resistance happening in certain pockets. So as a grower, you need to understand if it is not working out in your field, if there is still a yield drag, you need to switch to the peaking varieties.
Some rotation there. Hey, you also need to think about rotation when it comes to non-host crops.
Exactly. So, you have soybean cyst nematode, as the name sounds, so it doesn't come on corn, right? So you need to make sure that you're rotating with the crops, like the non-leguminous crops. You have corn and wheat in the rotation, and that reduces the number over a period of time if you're doing the crop rotation with the soybeans, with these crops.
Now, final thing you wanted to talk about from a management perspective, Abhi, was nematicides. We do have that ability to protect that seed when we plant it in the spring.
Yeah, for sure. Like nematicides, as I said, resistance is the primary tool of defense. So you have to always use that. And nematicides, they are another tool in the toolbox. So it does provide you some early season protection and provide that, protection that is needed on the roots when the infection happens with the soybean cyst nematode. So it does provide extra protection even in presence of the gene, or when you don't have the genes working, that's even better. So it's good to have nematicide. It's always recommended.
Yeah, put a couple of tools to work for you, right?
Exactly.
Hey, let's talk about some soil testing, some soil sampling, and how do we assess our fields? For soil sampling, let's talk about when.
So soybean cyst nematode, it's present in the soil because it is in the soil. So you can really sample at any time, whenever you want, when you have time. What we generally recommend is that try to get closer to the harvest, because that is when the population tends to be higher. So close to the harvest is when we recommend. So in Ontario, this is really, we're getting to that time. So get out there and know your number.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk about where. I mean, from a perspective of looking across the field, where should we be with our sampling?
So in terms of, as a grower, if you have some of the areas that that there is some areas where you have the yield drag, you could go there. Field entrance, you can go to the fence, around the fence. You can also go to some of the low-lying areas in the field where the water is stagnating, and a lot of the time you have a pretty high population in those areas too.
Now, Abhi, you've got a soil probe here and a bucket. Let's talk about protocols. How should we be covering that field, when we're out soil sampling?
So what we generally recommend is that, as I said, this pathogen is living in the soil. So the only way to know how much population you have is to get the soil sampling done. And this is the soil probe over here. Generally, we recommend go with the 1-inch diameter probe. And I would recommend when you take the sample, go about 6 to 8 inches deep and go at an angle of about 45. And if you can go through the roots, that's even better, because these pests, they're residing on the roots. You have the cyst developed on the roots, so you can capture them. So go through the roots if you can, and take about 10 to 20 samples in the section of the field that you want to target, and bulk that sample up. Use a bucket, collect those samples, 10 to 20 samples, mix them up, and submit it to the lab. And make sure before you submit, you are using a plastic bag, and you are also, of course, labeling it properly, and keep it in cool and the shade place. Don't expose it to the sun, because it's going to kill those nematodes.
Final question for you is, hey, we've got our sample, we've got it labeled, so where are we taking it? Who's going to do that analysis for us? What do we do?
Yeah, so there are plant diagnostic labs. You could submit it to the plant diagnostic labs. They do offer these services of the SCN count in the population. Generally, they would give you the number on eggs, cysts, and juveniles, those 3 different stages that soybean cyst nematode has. So you will get those numbers. And you can also submit sample to Albert Tenuta with the MAFRA, because he's also doing a survey in Ontario, and you could reach out to him directly or go through your seed rep.
Well, Abhi, hey, some great tips on how to manage soybean cyst nematodes. And for everybody, get out and do some sampling this fall and see if you've got any SC in your field. Always great to have you on Real Agriculture on the Soybean School, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming out, Vern. Really appreciate it.